We want to welcome everybody to tonight's Fireside Chat with Lyndon LaRouche for Thursday, November 18th. We are a few days after our conference, our highly successful conference of November 13th and 14th. There were a few thousand people that involved themselves in the conference on virtual platforms. There were, I think, over 35 speakers. There were many important discussions, but the most important thing I want to point out is that there have been 4 committees proposed by Helga LaRouche as a springboard for a campaign of action coming right out of that conference, because we don't want to have any time wasted or any time not used. Remember that the conference happened in a certain context of rapidly changing correlations of forces globally. And we'll be talking a little bit about that in a moment. Mike Billington will deal with a lot of that. So I want to only restrict myself to talking about these 4 committees. So the committees included one that came off panel 1, in which we were, Helga LaRouche in particular was leading a discussion involving diplomats from Russia and also high-level representatives from China and other nations, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other nations. And Afghanistan was largely the apparent context for the proposal, but what she was talking about is the higher resolution of the Afghanistan crisis through addressing the immediate danger of famine, which costs 22 million people right now, and the longer-term problem of integrating Afghanistan into a functioning economic process, what we're calling the World Land Bridge, advanced industrial productive economic process. So Helga has called this Operation Ibn Sina, naming it after a famous 10th century physician, philosopher, and genius who lived from about, I think, 970 to 10, or 980 rather, I think, to 1037. I believe those are the dates. And in any case, Ibn Sina was born in this area in Southwest Asia. He was known for 600 years as the most important medical authority in the world, and the canon of medicine was circulated throughout Southwest Asia and Europe and other parts of the world for 600 years as the primary book for that. But he was known. He wrote books on many other topics, and so she named this intervention Operation Ibn Sina, because the idea is, don't try to deal with the cards you've been dealt. Don't play the cards you've been dealt, talking about combating terrorism or expanding trade or building schools, all these things that people say, but either never happen or never achieve what they're supposed to achieve, because you're always starting from the wrong, we're going to use a term here, manifold of activity. What we mean by that is you're not starting from a context that you've defined in terms of the set of institutions powered by the policies, which are powered by certain principles of what a human being is, principles of creativity that then resolve themselves or express themselves as policies, but then are embodied in institutions. And then the actions that you take from that standpoint establish a reality, a process of reality that can actually change things for the better. If you don't have that, then you can have whatever proposal you want, but it will never change the circumstances because you never put the proper level of thought into it. And so Operation Ibn Sina is the first thing, and that pertains to Afghanistan, but it's a higher idea involving hospitals and medical care and food, of course, food relief, the expansion of a clean water system, and of course, the integration of Afghanistan in dialogue with Uzbekistan, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Iran, for that matter, India, and China. And Russia, of course, plays a role because of its earlier 1979 through 1989 involvement, and also because it was historically the other power besides Great Britain that was engaged in what people often call the Great Game for the control of that area of the world, particularly Afghanistan, as a transition point, as a transit point in that part of the world. So that was the first committee. Second committee is a No Limits to Growth Science Committee, who put forward a policy of no limits to growth, expanding nuclear and thermonuclear energy production, consumption, research, and development worldwide. But also that it would take on the fraud of climate change, but actually give people a way of thinking about that, which advances them. So that's the second thing. The third committee is a committee on education, and this came from the fourth panel, which we may describe, or others may describe, in which after a comparison was presented, well, many things were actually presented on that panel, but comparison between the present United States educational system and its problems to the present successful aspects of the Chinese educational system, particularly as it pertains to kindergarten, and elementary to junior high school level students. And there was an extensive discussion about this. So the conception was that seeing particularly what was going on in Virginia and seeing what's been going on in other of the schools, and of course this whole discussion around what people refer to as critical race theory, which is a bit more important from the when thought about as being critical theory applied to race, which is really the only correct way to identify what it really is. There's a committee that's been formed around that to take action. And we're going to need teachers. We're going to need other people involved in that committee. And then finally, the one committee that has sort of pre-exists all this, comes before all this, which is the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites, which was established in June of 2020 to establish an international health platform, including clean water supplies, healthy food, and the investigation of the boundaries of the sciences of biology, chemistry, and physics to supply medicine with the breakthroughs in the conceptions of diagnosis and treatment of disease that are so sorely revealed to be necessary in the wake of the crisis. So these four committees were formed, or they were proposed. And it's not that we're going to take all that up on these calls. We want everybody to know about it so that it's clear as to what it exactly is we are intending to do. There are derivative elements of all this, including some actions being taken by individuals who are going to be running for office, and many other things that we can talk about in the course of the evening. So I want to stop there and request that Mike Billington, who I think people all know, give us a kind of overview and merely of the international situation of the moment, but sort of in the aftermath of this failed COP26 and in the context of this evolving strategic crisis, particularly as that pertains to the Biden-Xi summit, as well as to new developments, including in the frontiers of thermonuclear fusion. You know, what is the picture, and how should we address how our forces can change that picture even as we expand beyond our present numbers. So, Mike?
Okay, good. Thanks, Dennis. So we are clearly in a dramatic political shift in history this past week. You might call it a phase shift within a phase shift, or a moment of opportunity within a moment of opportunity. I remember well 50 years ago when I first met LaRouche, he talked about, this was right after Nixon pulled the plug on the dollar and unleashed what became the speculative chaos. And Lynn warned there would be depressions, there'd be pandemics, there would be wars, small wars, and then potentially a big war, because driving this was the collapse of the American economic system and allowing the end of the FDR fixed exchange rates and the unleashing of wild speculation, British-style free markets instead of directed credit. And he warned this would be the case, and he said very few people are going to want to hear what I have to say or what we have to say. They don't want to think about how they have a personal responsibility for the future of mankind. But when this happens, when this hits, then everyone is going to suddenly wake up. They're going to suddenly realize that they've been living on false axioms, false assumptions, and they're going to look around to see who was lying to them and who was telling the truth. And that's when we have to be ready to lead. And this is that moment. What's happened in these last 2 weeks is that, first of all, in this so-called COP26 climate change event, the oligarchy came out in its own name. They basically acknowledged their intention. In a certain sense, I think it's based on what Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, he and Prince Charles have been at the center, along with the City of London bankers like Mark Carney, have been at the center of this whole so-called climate change hoax. In his book, he just laid it all out. He pointed to what's going on in certain countries in Africa, like in Ethiopia, where they're building railroads and agriculture and dams. And he said, well, this has to stop. He said, this reveals, this is a quote, this reveals the central conundrum of the combat against climate change. The same force that helps people escape from poverty and lead a decent life is the one that is destroying the livability of our planet for future generations. The emissions that lead to climate change are not just the result of selfish generation of industrialists or Western baby boomers. They're the consequence of the desire to create a better future for oneself. So here's these oligarchs saying, you know, it's the people is trying to escape from poverty, which is going to cause climate change and burn us up. We have to stop it. People cannot escape from poverty. Their desire to create a better future for themselves is undermining our planet, which, of course, scientifically is an absolute fraud, a hoax, but they're acknowledging their intent. People must not develop. We must stop growth. We must depopulate the earth. And this was said over and over again at this COP26 summit in Glasgow by Prince Philip, by Mark Carney, by the bankers. Mark Carney, in an earlier meeting with the Africans, literally told them that we're going to give you a lot of money. We're going to have a carbon market, and companies like Apple and Microsoft, they produce a lot of carbon, so they're going to have to trade carbon credits, and they'll buy carbon credits from you third world countries. You'll get a lot of money. All you have to do is promise not to develop. Don't cut down any trees. Don't build any railroads or roads. Don't mine your fossil fuels, and then we'll give you money, carbon credits, $1 million here and there for your corrupt leaders to live high off the hog. All they have to do is promise that the country remain backwards. But of course, these are private companies, so you'll have to expect that they're going to want to send people down there to make sure you're living up to their promises. So we're going to send some representatives of the Western banks and companies down to make sure you keep your country backwards. So this is why this COP26, which intended to get every country to voluntarily agree to shut down fossil fuels and why we call it Flop 26, why it failed miserably. Not only Russia and China and India said, like hell, we're going to stop producing energy for our people, but African countries, South American countries, by Bolivia's President Arce said, this is carbon colonialism. And the longtime president of Uganda, Museveni, he said, solar power and wind power being forced on Africa means poverty and death. So the recognition of what we have fought for, you all know about the pamphlet that we've published in several printings calling Crush the Green New Deal. LaRouche crushes the Green New Deal. This thing has been circulated internationally. This is read. People pay attention to this. And it has created an environment globally in which the human race and the nations, the majority of nations, remember, this represents the majority of the human race, Russia, China, India, Africa, South America. You know, when they say the international community knows that we need to impose, we have to stop carbon to save the planet, and the international community, well, the international community is a handful of oligarchs who have now been told to go to hell. Now, this doesn't mean we're out of the crisis, because the bankers' plan is to basically ignore governments. We don't care about governments, they say. They formed a bankers' cartel, which they call, with one of their acronyms, G-Funds. This stands for Glasgow Financial Associates for Net Zero. So this is a bankers' cartel, all the Western bankers, really, none from Asia, by the way, which is quite interesting. None from China, but not even from Japan and Korea. This is the Western banking crew that say governments aren't going to do what we want them to do, which is to divert all credit from production and growth and agriculture and industry and put it into bailing out the banks. We call it the Green New Deal. This bankers cartel literally wants to do away with the sovereignty of nations, take away economic policy from elected governments, and simply cut credit to anything that produces, because anything that produces creates carbon. So this is Malthusianism at its peak. The policy of not only deindustrializing, but depopulating the world. And it basically flopped, although, like I said, we're going to have to continue the fight, because these bankers believe that they can get populations to tolerate the destruction of sovereignty and the takeover of government policy by these financial institutions. So this, by the way, this is fascism. This is the meaning of fascism. If you haven't watched the conference that we had last weekend, the Schiller Institute conference on the 13th and 14th, you really must put aside time to watch that. It's 4 long panels, but you must watch this entire thing. This is a historic shift in history, this conference. And one of the points is that Paul Gallagher, our economics editor on the panel on the hyperinflationary danger, made clear that what we're seeing here by these bankers is exactly what Jean Marchak, the finance minister and the head of the Reichsbank under Hitler, that this is what he did. They burned down the Reichstag. They declared an emergency. They blamed it on the communists, of course, but they declared an emergency, just like 9/11. And then said, well, therefore, we need an emergency rule. Jean Marchak, the finance minister, must take over the direction of all credit, and it was all directed into building up the military for a war. And what's happening here includes, even though they say they're against all industry that has carbon, that doesn't mean anything that's producing the war machine. They want wars, and they're going to continue producing the planes and the ships and the bombs for their war with Russia and China. But mainly, they're diverting the world's credit into bailing out the Western financial system, which is now in a state of absolute bankruptcy. And it's now feeding into this hyperinflation. So Paul addresses that. I encourage you to watch it. Now, what happened with this Schiller Institute conference? The very day, well, the COP26 was supposed to end on Friday the 12th, but they ended up going over another day, frantically trying to get countries to sign on to some agreement And what happened? Well, basically, they said no. They said, okay, let's water it down to the bare minimum. Let's get everybody to agree to phase out coal. And India came in, and with China backing them and many countries, and said, no, we're not going to phase out coal. I mean, think about this. 80% of the energy in India is generated by coal, 90% in Africa. Half of Africa doesn't even have electricity, but half electricity they have is generated by coal. And they want to stop using coal? What does that mean? This means killing our population, killing our citizens. We're not going to do it. So India said, we're not going to sign anything that says phase out coal, forget it. And so they said, okay, well, how about phasing down coal? And they said, yeah, okay, we'll sign that. What the hell does that mean? But it was such a complete flop that even the guy who ran the COP26, the British guy, Sharma, he gave an apology. He gave a speech saying, oh, I'm so sorry, we failed. This is such a disaster. Well, indeed, it's actually a victory. It's a victory for mankind. So that happened on literally the day that we were beginning the Schiller Institute conference on the 13th and 14th. And again, I say, if you haven't watched it all, watch it all. This is historic because this brought together, this demonstrated that, in fact, even a small organization like ours has the power of ideas that the human race, nations, and citizens throughout the world will unite behind the truth. Right? So this is the moment of truth. And what we had at this conference with leading government officials, two top government officials and think tank advisors to Putin who chose our platform as the basis where they can discuss the truth. So they spoke at our conference, people from China, leading scientists from throughout the world, from Europe, from Africa, from the United States, and South America, basically refuting the fake science of climate change. Unfortunately, no governments so far, have had the courage to refute the science, the fake science, behind this climate change argument that carbon has anything to do of any significance with climate. But nonetheless, they're refuting the results. So, this is taking place. It's our job to get the science out. And the third panel of this conference, which again, if you haven't seen, watch it, brought together leading scientists to unquestionably, irrefutably refute the fake science that carbon is somehow killing us all, when in fact carbon dioxide is the science of life. It's the food for plants. It's not death. It's life. So this took place. We had several thousand views from different platforms. You probably all know that YouTube tried to sabotage our use of YouTube for the conference to undermine our bringing the world together around this. But they didn't succeed. We got it done. And more important than the numbers who watched it was the representatives of government. That this was people who see this platform as the crucial thread to bringing the world together and to bringing especially the United States out from under this Wall Street military-industrial complex, British intelligence mentality of us against them, us against Russia and China, and basically is subservient to this fake carbon crisis, climate change fraud to Wall Street and to the British Empire. So all of this happened, and believe me, everybody is watching. Our enemies are watching this. And lo and behold, the fear of God came into several of the Western leaders. This includes Mr. Biden. This includes Merkel from Germany. This includes Macron in France. Then all of a sudden, just on Tuesday, all in the same day, actually, Monday night in the U.S., but Tuesday morning in China, Biden had a 3.5-hour talk with Xi Jinping. And Macron had a talk with Lukashenko. This, as I'm sure you all know, they're trying to start a war in between the EU and Russia and Belarus over a handful of migrants who want to come into Poland from Belarus, and they're turning this into a fake confrontation about supposedly Belarus and Russia are weaponizing migrants, trying to undermine the EU. And by the way, let me just mention, it's worth mentioning, while they argue that Russia and Belarus are using these migrants, who, by the way, are almost all migrants from the wars that the U.S. and the British started in Syria and Iraq and Lebanon, or Libya, rather, that these are refugees from the wars we started. And they're arguing that this is Russia and Belarus trying to undermine the EU by sending migrants in, just a few thousand, actually. And yet the same EU has argued for years that Italy must accept every single migrant who comes across the Mediterranean or comes in from Turkey. And they must accept, and then one of the governments under the Lega Nord, this guy Salvini, who turned away one ship out of hundreds of ships by being manned by Europeans, bringing these migrants into Italy. He turned away one ship, and his government was brought down, and he was brought up on criminal charges. But that's Italy. Here we have Russia involved, so we have to blame Russia and Belarus for weaponizing migrants. So anyway, what happened? Merkel got on the phone with Lukashenko, and this totally freaked out the whole EU crowd. On the same day, the EU imposed new sanctions on Belarus. And even back in Germany, the Green Party, these fanatic Greens who are totally for war with Russia and for shutting down the world economy, and even Olaf Scholz, who is the guy who is about to take over as the chancellor to replace Angela Merkel, even he said, "Oh my God, this is terrible. You're talking to Lukashenko? Why, that terrible dictator? How can you're undermining the unity of the EU?" So what happened here? Merkel said, "Hey, wait a minute. We're on the brink of war, folks. This is what's going on in our minds. This is not what's in the news. We're on the brink of war with Russia, a nuclear war." And she got on the phone with Lukashenko a few days ago, and then on Tuesday, and then again today, actually. All right. And at the same time, Macron got on the phone with Putin, and he talked about this same fake crisis on the Belarus-Poland border, but he also talked about Ukraine, where the NATO is accusing Russia of aggression because they're mobilizing troops in their border within their own country, while we not only mobilize and sell huge amounts of weapons to Ukraine to carry out their war against the Donbas region, the so-called separatists. But not only that, the British are talking about sending in 600 armed troops. Right? This is provoking a war, and they blame Russia because within their own territory they're mobilizing their troops. You know, how dare you move your troops near to our troops that are on your border? So I mean, this is the level of war hysteria that's taking place, and yet Macron got on the phone with Putin, and they talked about, my God, we're on the brink of war. Again, I'm putting words in their mouths, but they know, people know, we're sitting on the brink of nuclear war. And there is the fear of God in these people, and it was brought about because their game to get the world to submit to this British imperial deindustrialization and division of the world is falling apart. So they talked. Now, it's really important that Biden got on the phone with Xi Jinping. 3.5 hours, well past Biden's bedtime, past midnight. This is quite extraordinary. And Biden is, everybody knows that Biden is a weak president. He has cognitive problems and so forth. He's crazy on this climate change stuff. He's crazy on some other things. But he comes out of a tradition, obviously, which knows that you don't want to have a nuclear war with Russia or China. And he has committed to talking to Putin. He's committed to talking to Xi Jinping. And he did. And the U.S. readout on that meeting really didn't have much to say, but the Chinese were quite honest about it, and nobody in the West tried to refute the way the Chinese read out. The Chinese said, look, this meeting will inject certainty into this bilateral relationship. It's sending a signal that the two countries will cooperate in many areas, despite they could not avoid fierce competition. But in fact, they're trying to manage competition. This is a positive sign for the world. Xi Jinping himself, they reported, said that the world's two largest economies and permanent members of the UN Security Council need to increase communication and cooperation, run their domestic affairs well, and at the same time, they need to shoulder their share of international responsibilities and work together to advance the noble cause of world peace and development. He said a sound and steady China-U.S. relationship is needed for the advancing the two countries' respective development. China and the U.S. should respect each other, should coexist in peace, and pursue win-win cooperation. He laid out several principles and priorities to respect each other's social systems and the development paths, respect each other's core interests, and respect each other's right to development, right? Don't contain our development. We have the right to develop. In fact, they encourage the U.S. to development and to join them on the Belt and Road and bring about the kind of development that the American industries need by participating in international growth. He didn't spell that out, but that was the idea. Now remember, when we published the World Land Bridge, the report that said the new Silk Road has become the World Brand Bridge, 2 volumes of that, one in 2014, one in 2017 or 18, maybe even 19, I think. The intention originally was that when we presented to the American industrial, European industrial community, to the business people, when we said, look, this is the biggest global development policy in the history of the human race, following the fact that China has just achieved a miracle never seen in humanity, releasing 800 people from poverty and building the most magnificent, massive infrastructure development program within China that the world has ever seen, bigger even than Roosevelt's in the 1930s. And then they're taking it out to the rest of the world. We literally said, how could any American industrialist not leap to the opportunity to participate in this kind of tremendous development program, which would not only do good for mankind, but it would be profitable for American companies? But that ain't what happened. What happened is that they've been sucked into the idea that that speculation and making the short-term, not long-term, short-term money by speculation is all that counts at this point, and they basically gave in to this Anglo Wall Street crowd. And this is what left this country in a state of economic decay. So you had, like I said, on Tuesday, you had basically leaders, not the British, but the French and the Germans and the Americans all felt the fear of God and got on the phone and said, hey, wait a minute, let's figure out a way to try to get out from under this disaster. Now that's good, very good. It's not enough. We have to unleash a global development process in which the U.S. fully joins with Russia and China in this new Silk Road. It's the only chance we have. So that's where we're going. Now look at effectively where this organization sits. You know, we had these idiots who dropped out of the organization who don't care about being part of an international organization. They want to think that all we have to do is kiss ass to Trump and his campaign, and if he says China is bad, then we have to say China is bad. And this insanity has actually fed the rebirth, in a sense, of this organization by getting rid of these people who don't care about everything LaRouche stood for. The idea that this represents the human race, that we can only save this country if we have the human race mobilized behind its own self-development. And now we have that within our hands. The potential for the new Bretton Woods, the new paradigm. We are at the center of human history on this point. It's one of those moments where each and every citizen of the U.S., of Europe, and around the world, really, but especially here, where people have been so long in a state of denial, of thinking that somehow they will take care of us. This great country can never collapse. Now they know that we're heading into a dark age. They see the hyperinflation. Everybody's affected by it. They see their kids being told they can take drugs, that if they want to change sex when they're 5 years old, that's okay. They see that we have lunatics in the Congress and in the media who are literally provoking a war that could be a nuclear war with Russia and China. Everybody is aware that something is horribly, horribly wrong. And this is precisely the moment that Lynn was talking about in 1971. And it's up to us. It's up to this relatively small organization with the power of huge, heavy ideas that the world is now turning to us. The world's nations, world scientists, world's institutions, they're turning to us because we have, and unfortunately we pretty much alone have the capacity to bring all these forces together. And again, I repeat, if you have not watched this entire conference over the weekend, do so. It will inspire you to understand that at this moment, as Percy Shelley said in his In Defense of Poetry, this is a moment where suddenly people are capable of understanding profound ideas of man and nature. And it's our responsibility as human beings to live up to that, to provide that kind of leadership, and to make it clear to the human race they need not despair. It's dangerous. We could go down. We could have a nuclear war. But it's an opportunity, a moment of opportunity, precisely because people are ready to listen to ideas that, in fact, cohere with the idea that we are human beings. That what distinguishes us from the animals is that power of creativity, where we can see the future and where we can act to create a future rather than waiting for some sort of magical process or the powers that be to bring the future about. This is the moment of truth for the human race. So I'll leave it at that, and we can have a discussion.